But I also knew there was another side to Jean-Pierre, one that Melinda had mentioned. While he appeared friendly on the surface, beneath that facade lay a self-centered nature, hidden anger, and a fierce competitive streak. He sometimes acted as if life owed him something, and I could see the glimpses of this deeper truth, especially when he interacted with me. It wasn't hard to understand why he felt that way. I had a stable job with decent pay, and perhaps he believed I had stepped into his life and taken his ex-wife from him, even though they had separated long before I arrived. Furthermore, he noticed the bond I was forming with his daughters, which might have led him to feel threatened, as if I were a better role model in their eyes. In his mind, it could have been a competition, Kevin 3, Jean-Pierre 0. Keeping this in mind, I approached my interactions with Melinda's ex with caution. On the Wednesday before the wedding, Melinda called me, clearly frustrated. Jean-Pierre says he can't take care of the girls next week, she explained, her voice thick with annoyance. Why not? I asked, bracing for the answer. He claims he has a work obligation, she huffed. A work obligation? He sells used cars. How is that even a real excuse? Listening to her frustration, I offered support. Maybe we can find someone else, I suggested, recalling a few babysitting options I thought would be better than Jean-Pierre. But Melinda wasn't keen on any of those. It just doesn't feel right to send the girls to someone new for a whole week while we're away, she said, her tone softening. I'm sure we can get credits for our travel, I reassured her. Don't let this spoil the wedding. I'll handle it. She promised she wouldn't let it ruin the day, but I could tell she was still upset. As we ended the call, I had a sinking feeling that Jean-Pierre had stirred up this trouble on purpose. Instead of heading to St. Martin, the four of us ended up spending the week along the Oregon coast. Unlike the Caribbean, we didn't have to worry about sunblock at Cannon Beach, but we still had a fantastic time. We strolled along the sandy shores, explored tide pools filled with fascinating sea creatures, built sandcastles in the dunes, and hiked along the scenic cliffs, creating memories that would last far longer than any tropical getaway. After the whirlwind of wedding festivities and settling into my new home, life began to find its rhythm again. I returned to my role at Venin, while Melinda pursued her career in real estate. The girls were both in school now. Francine was off to kindergarten, and Esme had entered 2nd grade. Those next few years felt like a delightful chapter for us, filled with laughter and routine. I threw myself into work, diving deeper into the sales side of the business. Things were going well. Melinda was closing about 1 sale a month, despite working fewer hours. She also took time to help care for her father, who had been unwell. The girls thrived at school, each carving out their own little niches. Francine quickly became one of the popular kids, her outgoing personality winning friends easily. Esme, on the other hand, was a bit more reserved. She took her time opening up to others, and it was tough to see her struggle with her trust in adults. I made it a point to spend extra time with her, hoping to be someone she could lean on. In an unexpected turn, Jean-Pierre began visiting more often, canceling on us less frequently. It was surprising to see him so comfortable in my home, and as Melinda got the girls ready, he and I would have friendly chats. I reminded myself that there was more to him than I had initially thought. He had a charming side that surprised me. One memorable day, he dropped some exciting news on the girls. He was taking them to the circus. Sitting in my living room, he animatedly described the elephants, lions, and breathtaking acts. Francine practically bounced off the couch with excitement, and even Esme looked genuinely thrilled for the upcoming adventure. The circus became a hot topic in our household for weeks, and the anticipation built day by day. Unfortunately, as luck would have it, I caught a nasty cold right before the big day. Maybe it was the flu. Either way, I knew I had to keep my distance to avoid exposing the girls. So, I retreated to the basement, armed with a space heater and a cot, to wait out the illness. On the afternoon of the circus, I got a call from Melinda, sounding frantic. "You won't believe this," she exclaimed. "Their father canceled on them." "What?" I was taken aback. He's not taking them to the circus? I tried to process her words through my feverish haze. Yep, he's flaked out. It's after 2 p.m., and I'm tied up with a client for at least an hour. My heart sank as I thought about how disappointed the girls would be. I struggled to muster the energy to get up, finally managing to pull myself together. I quickly grabbed my phone and called the circus company. To my relief, I learned there were still tickets available, but I had to go to the Tacoma Dome box office in person. They wouldn't sell over the phone. I threw on some clothes, feeling weak and cold, and headed out into the dreary weather. The rain fell heavily, a typical downpour for the season. I turned on the heat in my car, trying to warm up and clear the foggy windows. Thankfully, the traffic was lighter than I expected, and I arrived at the Tacoma Dome just before 3:30 p.m. I approached the ticket counter, my throat feeling raw. "I need 3 tickets for tonight's circus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The ticket agent gave me a look. "We only have general admission in the top row for $20 each, or a few reserved seats closer to the action for $140 each." I hesitated, then decided it was worth it. "I'll take 3 reserved seats," I said, knowing that making the girls happy was my top priority. As I drove back home, I called Melinda. "Hey, I just bought circus tickets. You can still take the girls after all." "Oh my gosh, Kevin," she exclaimed, clearly surprised. "Did you really get out of bed, drive in the rain, and spend almost $500 on tickets just to make the girls happy?" I shrugged, feeling a bit sheepish. "Well, it's not completely like that," I admitted, but then I broke into a cough. "I just thought they would be disappointed otherwise." "I really appreciate you," she said softly. A few weeks later, I joined Melinda and her friends for a girls' night out, acting as their designated driver. I enjoyed a drink and caught up with Taylor, who seemed to be doing well, though she mentioned her older sister Janice was having a tough time. I remembered Janice as attractive but not quite as charming as Taylor. She had 3 kids from 2 different relationships, and neither father was involved anymore. "Do you know anyone who's hiring?" Taylor asked, concern etched on her face. "Janice can be a little forgetful, but she works hard. She really needs something stable." I hesitated to recommend her for a receptionist position at Crescent Creek. It felt a bit like setting someone up on a blind date. There were potential problems, but also a chance for something good. Still, Taylor had been a good friend for a long time. "Actually, we might have a job for her," I said cautiously. "Really? Thank you." Taylor's face lit up, and she gave me a quick hug before we all headed home. As we drove, Melinda brought it up. "What's with Taylor being so warm with you?" she asked, sounding a mix of curious and protective. I explained the situation, and she nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Okay, I guess. Just making sure you're good." A few weeks later, we hired Janice. I hoped that Melinda would be able to handle the basic tasks of being a receptionist without any major hiccups. As the months rolled by, life fell into a steady routine. Nothing overly exciting happened, but we also avoided any significant problems. I felt comfortable with this way of living, my hard work paid off with a well-deserved raise, and Melinda began discussing the possibility of getting a bigger house. Just as we had expected, home prices had risen, and we realized we could sell my place for a good price and buy something larger. However, while Melinda was excited about the prospect, I felt more cautious. I wanted to carefully consider our options before making such a big leap. As we settled into a routine, we discussed saving money for our daughter's college fund while living in my house. Melinda agreed to the plan, but I could tell she wasn't exactly enthusiastic about it. Over the next year, several significant events unfolded, starting with the passing of Melinda's father. One evening, we received a call from her mother, and I listened quietly as Melinda spoke. She didn't break down or cry immediately, it was as if we had all been slowly grieving his declining health for some time. I could sense the mix of emotions swirling around us. After the chaos of losing a loved one, we all needed time to adjust to the new reality of life without him. Melinda seemed to retreat into herself during this time, creating a noticeable distance between us. I noticed she was somewhat distant with the girls too. I suspected this was her way of coping with her grief, and I hoped we would reconnect eventually. But as the days passed, I also observed a new tension developing between Esme and Francine. Sibling disagreements were normal, especially considering their contrasting personalities: Francine, the lively younger sister, and Esme, the quieter one. They had always been close, but now that bond appeared to be shifting. Then there was Jean-Pierre. Over time, he had drifted from job to job, charming everyone with his friendly demeanor yet often lacking the commitment needed for long-term success. He would start strong, only to reveal his true nature, a pattern that discouraged most employers from hiring him unless they were desperate. But it seemed he had finally found his niche selling cars. Perhaps he had changed, or maybe his new situation suited him better. He was now working at a dealership specializing in pre-owned luxury vehicles, focusing on high-end European and Japanese cars. With his good looks and confident attitude, he easily connected with customers in search of luxury. So, I was surprised to see a black Land Rover parked outside my house one afternoon, Jean-Pierre inside, waiting for the girls. The last time I had seen him, he was driving an older Honda Civic. As I stepped outside, I noticed he had also taken one of my beers and some fancy smoked salmon I had bought earlier. "Hey, man!" he called out cheerfully as I approached. When I saw the salmon, I just had to try it. I nodded, choosing to keep my mouth shut. It had been a rough day at work, and the last thing I needed was Jean-Pierre in my house, drinking my beer and munching on my food. After he left, I turned to Melinda, hoping she would understand how I felt. But her response shocked me. "Kevin, who cares? It's just food. We can buy more," she said dismissively. After years of marriage, I knew that arguing about trivial matters could risk our relationship, especially given the stress we were already under. I didn't want to pick a fight, so I responded calmly, "Okay." But I couldn't shake off how defensive she seemed about him. As I reflected on our relationship, it struck me that since her father passed away, we hadn't truly reconnected. The next day at work, rumors began to swirl around the office. The economy had slowed down significantly, resulting in fewer new houses being sold. We had initially anticipated some growth this year when creating our budget, but that hadn't materialized. When we create a budget, it's supposed to be a careful estimate of what business will be like over a specific period. There's always pressure to show an increase, and I remembered my original numbers had shown little growth. I had been instructed to adjust them to reflect a rise, which I did. Once all the budgets were submitted, upper management based their plans on those inflated numbers. They hired new staff, bought equipment, and built up inventory, all based on those questionable guesses. But as the economy slowed, it began to take a toll on profits. This made the shareholders uneasy, and upper management was scrambling to find ways to increase profits, even with sales dwindling. Typically, that meant cutting costs, and that's where the rumors originated. At home, the outside stresses began to seep into our usually happy life. Melinda's real estate sales plummeted, which made her increasingly tense. I was on edge, worrying about the swirling rumors at work, and to make matters worse, the girls had started arguing more frequently. "I want my own room," Esme declared one evening. "I don't want to share with Francine anymore." This led Melinda to mention a larger house she had seen, talking about how great it would be for all of us. But with the uncertainty surrounding the economy, buying a more expensive house felt like the last thing we needed. When I brought this up, it was clear that I was seen as the bad guy in this situation. Esme walked away, visibly troubled. The next day at work, I took a hard look at my sales numbers. Most of my products had remained steady or even saw a small increase, except for the lumber. The prices of that tropical hardwood had shot up by 18%. I quickly realized why. Premium products weren't typically used in new housing projects. This wood was more commonly purchased for custom homes and renovations, markets that didn't fluctuate as much as new home building. This realization lifted my spirits a bit, as I felt a glimmer of hope amid the chaos. That afternoon, more news came down from the company. Jack Valentine, my mentor and supporter, was retiring early. He had accepted an offer elsewhere, and several other experienced managers were following suit. Then I heard concerning news: Charlie Flanagan was moving up to take Jack's vice president position. I had never gotten along well with Flanagan, and I felt he didn't want me there either. With all this swirling in my mind, I decided to keep my head down and focus on my work for a while, hoping that things would improve in both my personal and professional life. That approach seemed to work well over the next few months. However, one Thursday, an unsettling announcement echoed through the office about a reduction in force, a RIF. While I didn't worry too much about my own job, I felt a deep sense of concern for those who might be affected. Later that day, I received a call to meet with Flanagan at the corporate office. A nervous energy buzzed in my chest, but I was confident in my numbers as I stepped into the building. Kevin Flanagan made me wait 10 long minutes before beckoning me into Jack's old office, now his own. As I entered, he greeted me with a firm handshake and a forced smile, the kind that felt more like a mask than genuine warmth. You know that feeling when someone tries too hard to be friendly, but it just doesn't sit right? That was exactly how I felt. I much preferred the company of honest people, even if they were a bit gruff. As you know, he began, adopting a serious tone, we need to make some changes in the business. My heart sank. Oh no, am I getting fired? I worried silently. Kevin, he said, flashing another of those forced smiles, don't worry. You're part of the family here. He opened his arms as if to welcome me, but I could see the seriousness in his eyes. We're going to need to change some things, he continued, his demeanor shifting from faux friendliness to stern authority. We discussed a few minor issues that didn't hold my interest, but then he dropped a bombshell: the 5% donation to the Indian tribe in Brazil? That's ending. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I scrambled to convince him of the benefits that the donation had brought to the community. It's ensured we have a steady supply of lumber for years, I argued. The only thing I'm worried about is next quarter. He chuckled harshly. Sales of the tropical hardwood are up 18%, I pressed, determined to make my case. We don't need to make this cut because the business is handling the costs. That's good, he replied, but then added, now we're going to add 5 more points to the total. Kevin, I replied, trying to remain composed, I need to meet with them in person to explain what we're doing. Flanagan studied me for a long moment, and I could see the cheerful facade fade away, revealing his true feelings. After a tense pause, he reluctantly agreed. Okay, but make it quick and do it soon. With that, our meeting ended, leaving me with a heavy weight on my shoulders. The pride I had felt from helping Mafi and his group was quickly fading. I dreaded facing my friend and letting him down. For the first time, I began to question my future at Venin. When I got home that night, the atmosphere was tense. The girls were bickering over the silliest things, and although Melinda wasn't in a bad mood, there was an unmistakable distance between us. It felt like negativity was hanging in the air, and after another evening filled with disagreements, I had a sudden inspiration. The basement was mostly unfinished. There was a laundry area and some storage space, but I envisioned creating a small room in one corner. It had windows, so it could easily be turned into a proper bedroom. Esme, I called, excitement bubbling up inside me. I want to talk to you about something. What is it? She replied with a sigh. How about I build you a new room in the basement? I said, my enthusiasm spilling over. You're not going to make her sleep in the dusty old basement, Melinda interjected, but I ignored her and focused on Esme. You can help design it and pick any color you want. I added, wanting to see that spark of excitement in her eyes. All 4 of us headed downstairs, and I showed Esme my vision. As I explained the details, I could see her eyes light up at the thought of having her own special space. "How would you do it?" Melinda asked, raising an eyebrow. I began to explain how I would frame the wall, add a wall heater, lay down a nice floor, and install a door. I felt grateful for everything I had learned while working for Jim Buehler. For the first time in a while, the mood shifted, and everyone seemed happier. We talked about colors for the room, where the closet would go, and Esme asked a million questions about her new space. For a moment, I noticed Francine seemed a little left out. She was used to being the center of attention. "I want a room in the basement too," she shouted, causing us all to laugh. That night felt remarkably positive, despite the recent troubles. There were bright moments as Melinda became more affectionate, and the girls stopped bickering for a while. Still, I couldn't shake the looming problems at work. Ryan, one of the new trainees, had been let go during the staff reduction. I liked Ryan and valued his hard work. He was new to the lumber business but had been learning quickly. Before he left, he came to my office to thank me, handing me his contact details and shaking my hand with sincerity. In the back of my mind, I knew I had to return to Brazil and speak with Mafi and the tuna about the changes in our plans. I had some tough news to share, and I started to contemplate whether I could import lumber myself and launch a small business. I felt sure Mafi would want to team up with me. I began looking into small business loans and set up a meeting with the Small Business Administration for later that week. In my free time, I started planning my business, envisioning a brighter future. Then, on Tuesday, I came home to find Jean-Pierre at my house. This was unusual since he often canceled his visits with the girls on his scheduled days. Maybe his job is helping him grow up, I thought as I walked in. The scene before me was cozy. Melinda and Francine were at the kitchen table, chatting animatedly with Jean-Pierre, who was casually enjoying one of my beers. Melinda was laughing at something he had said, and for a moment, I felt like an outsider in my own home. "Kevin," Jean-Pierre called out with a smile. "Come sit down with us." He gestured to one of the beers, acting as if I were a guest in my own house, seated at the table with my wife and sipping my drinks. I forced a nod at everyone and retreated upstairs to change my clothes. As I stood in my bedroom, I could hear their lively conversation echoing through the house. A wave of frustration washed over me. I knew that if I brought this up with Melinda, things could get awkward. While having Jean-Pierre more involved with the girls was a positive thing, I still felt uneasy about trusting him completely. Even though I had no reason to doubt Melinda, I sensed cracks beginning to form in our relationship. A week later, I found myself on a flight to Brazil, deep in thought about how to approach Mafi and the tuna people regarding our new financial situation. I couldn't shake the worries swirling in my mind. How would they react? Would they understand? Additionally, the idea of starting my own business loomed over me like a cloud. Could I really make it successful? Would I be able to support myself? These questions haunted me as I soared through the night sky. When I arrived at Mafi's village, the atmosphere felt like a celebration. Music filled the air, and people danced joyfully, some wearing vibrant masks. The enticing aroma of delicious food wafted through the crowd, which only heightened my anxiety. After exchanging warm hugs, we gathered in a large dining area, surrounded by a feast of food and drinks. "Kevin, my good friend." Mafi greeted me, his smile as bright as ever. But I couldn't muster the same cheer. I had to look away, feeling the weight of guilt pressing down on me. The progress they had made with the orphanage and the school weighed heavily on my conscience. What if they had to stop paying their teacher because of my financial troubles? These thoughts raced through my mind as I mentally prepared to break the news. "Kevin," Mafi said, studying my face closely. "I can see something's bothering you. Tell me," he urged eagerly. Taking a deep breath, I explained the challenges we were facing, how the construction of new homes had slowed down and the stock values had plummeted. I finally revealed how my company needed to change its financial strategies, something that had worked well for us for so long. Mafi's smile faded. "Kevin, he replied, his voice heavy with concern. You don't decide this. The big company does. Yes, I nodded, feeling the gravity of the situation. He suggested I take a walk to the orphanage while he spoke with some others. I found a quiet spot on a stump atop a small hill, looking down at the orphanage as I contemplated my struggles. Work was becoming increasingly tough, and my relationship with Melinda felt strained. The girls seemed less cheerful, and I worried about Jean-Pierre's continued presence in our lives. As these dark thoughts swirled, I suddenly became aware of my surroundings. Below me, children who had so little were laughing and playing, their joy infectious. I spotted a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, singing and clapping her hands, her tattered clothes a stark contrast to her radiant smile. In that moment, I realized how trivial my problems were compared to theirs. I understood then what I needed to do. I had never shied away from hard work and believed in my own abilities. The only thing holding me back was the comfort of my job at Van Duyn. I hesitated, worrying about stepping out of my comfort zone, while these kids faced much graver hardships. With renewed determination, I set off to find Mafi and share my plans. I met him halfway up the trail, and his big smile was back. "Kevin," he exclaimed, "you buy lumber from Tuna, you sell it, then pay us. This could really work out well." From my business classes in college, I remembered that cash flow was a major concern for new small businesses. If I could pay them after selling the lumber, it would ease my cash flow problem significantly. We talked late into the night, fleshing out the details of our new plan. The rebate from Van Duyn would end in 90 days, giving me a 3-month window to get my business off the ground. Excitingly, I had already received good news from the SBA regarding a loan, and I could also tap into my 401k savings, along with some personal savings. I felt confident I would have enough money to start my venture. That Thursday night, I was eager to share my plans with Melinda. Thankfully, the girls were calm, giving me the chance to talk to her without interruptions. I excitedly explained my business plans and my arrangement with the Tuna. However, Melinda didn't seem as thrilled as I had hoped. "You mean you might not have a steady paycheck?" she asked, her brow furrowing in concern. I began outlining the profits I anticipated from selling hardwood before taking on additional work, but her expression remained skeptical. "Okay, I guess," she said slowly, sounding uncertain. "Just try to leave on good terms so they might want you back if this doesn't work out." Her response stung. I understood her worries, especially given her past experiences with unstable income before we got together. I knew a significant part of why she had initially liked me was my reliability. Still, it was disheartening to feel that she didn't have faith in my abilities. Over the next 3 months, I poured my heart and soul into creating my small business. I found a warehouse to rent, confirmed my deal with the Tuna and Mafi, and wrote a comprehensive business plan to submit to the SBA. I was thrilled when I got approved for a low-interest loan. There were countless details to manage, but I was amazed at how smoothly everything was falling into place. One of the challenges I faced was hiring staff. I knew I needed someone for the office and another for the warehouse. Thankfully, with Van Duyn downsizing, I found some promising candidates. I hired Janice Pilkington, Taylor's sister, who made up for her lack of experience with her enthusiasm and dedication. I also brought on Albert Ramos to manage the warehouse and shipping. One more hire, Ryan Christensen, had been let go during the downsizing, but I saw potential in him as a sales coordinator. Without sales, our business couldn't grow. When I asked Ryan to join me, he was excited. He had just gotten married and was about to become a father. "Thank you, Kevin," he said gratefully after I made the offer. "I promise I won't let you down." As I approached the final weeks before launching my business, I scheduled a meeting with Charlie Flanagan at his office, giving him no details about the agenda. "So what's up?" Flanagan asked, his tone devoid of friendliness this time. "Charlie," I began, taking a deep breath, I'm giving my 2-week notice. I handed him my resignation letter. My last day will be February. On the 24th, Flanagan just stared at me, his expression unreadable as he tried to grasp the implications of what I had just said. "So, what will you do?" he asked, his voice lacking any semblance of kindness. The tension in the air was palpable, his true feelings surfacing beneath the surface. I took a breath, preparing to explain my plans without revealing too much. "I'm going to try something new on my own," I said, keeping it vague. Before he could launch into a lecture about company policies or agreements, I cut him off. "I've already spoken to HR and legal," I asserted. "What I'm doing doesn't violate any company policies." I noticed his face flush with anger. Flanagan was a man who thrived on control, and I could see him wrestling with the desire to undermine my plans. But he was trapped, there was nothing he could do to stop me. "Okay," he replied dismissively, "you were probably going to lose your job anyway. This will just save me the trouble of paying you." With that, he turned back to his computer, dismissing me as if I were an annoying fly buzzing around his head. At home, things were still a bit chaotic, but at least they hadn't worsened. I was spending less time in the comfort of my living room, busy setting up the office and warehouse after hours. I usually got home around 7 p.m. and left again early the next morning. I knew Melinda and I needed to have a serious conversation soon to mend our relationship, but the thrill of building my business kept pushing that thought to the back of my mind. One project I was excited about was Esme's new room, which was almost finished. I just needed to put up the trim, hang a closet rod, and paint it. "How about we paint it together this weekend?" I suggested to Esme. "You can pick out the color. Let's go to the paint store Saturday morning." Her face lit up with joy at the idea, and I felt a sense of relief. That Saturday, while Melinda and Francine were out shopping, it was just Esme and me in her new room. We settled on a soft yellow color called Summer Sunrise, and it felt refreshing to share this quiet moment together, each of us working on our own sections of the room. Although Esme was usually the quiet type, we had always shared a strong bond, often engaging in light-hearted conversation. However, that morning, she seemed unusually pensive. I noticed her staring at the walls, lost in thought. "Everything okay, Esme?" I asked, applying another stroke of paint. At first, she didn't respond, and I wondered if she had even heard me. When I looked over, her expression was distant, as if she were grappling with something heavy. "Esme?" I pressed gently. After a moment, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like my dad." Her admission caught me off guard. I had noticed Jean-Pierre around more often recently, and I had hoped it was a sign that he was improving, which would ultimately be good for the girls. But my main concern remained, as long as he treated them well, I could tolerate his presence, even if he often drank my beer and raided our food without asking. "Why don't you like him?" I inquired, trying to keep my tone neutral. She took her time, searching for the right words. "He says things about you that I don't think are true," she confessed, her brow furrowing. "He makes jokes that hurt, and he talks about Mom like there's a chance they might get back together." I felt a pang of concern. "And that confuses Francine?" I asked, remembering how impressionable young children could be. "Yeah," Esme said, her voice quivering. "I don't believe him, but sometimes I feel like Francine is starting to." I knew how crucial it was for children to feel secure and supported by their parents. When they started doubting their parents' words, it could create a whirlwind of confusion. "What exactly is he saying?" I asked, my heart racing. While I felt uneasy about Jean-Pierre's comments toward me, I was more worried about how he was trying to shake up our family dynamics. Later that evening, when the girls were preoccupied with their toys, I took the opportunity to talk to Melinda about my conversation with Esme. "Oh, I know Jean-Pierre can be careless with his words," she replied, almost nonchalantly. "Melinda," I said, surprised at her casual attitude. "If he's trying to create problems for us, then it's a big deal. We need to address this." "Fine," she said, her irritation creeping in. "I'll talk to him on Tuesday." I reached out to her, trying to connect. "I just want to create a stable environment for the girls," I said, my voice earnest. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. There was a wall between us that was hard to break down. Once we sorted this out, I was determined to put more effort into rekindling our relationship. The good news was that from the start, my business was thriving. Part of that success was thanks to my good friend Alan Church at McLean's Lumber, who quickly offered his support. I knew I had to keep prices fair and provide excellent service, but Alan was giving us a fantastic opportunity to succeed. Another lucky break came in our third month when I received a call from Jack Valentine, my former mentor from Van Duyn. After leaving Van Duyn, he had invested in a small mill that specialized in custom timbers. After some friendly banter, he got to the point. "I'm looking for a new distributor. Are you interested?" Jack asked. I was intrigued. I realized I would need more options besides the hardwoods from Brazil, and specialty timbers could work well for us. "Absolutely," I replied, and we set a date to meet. While we were still a small operation compared to the giants at Van Duyn, I had heard whispers that Charlie Flanagan was not pleased with our success so far. Thankfully, we hadn't faced any direct trouble yet, but I knew it could come sooner rather than later. Meanwhile, business continued to flourish. By May, our third month in operation, we were already making a profit. I was traveling along the West Coast, setting up dealers in major markets. However, this travel was putting a strain on our marriage. If I had taken a moment to reflect, I might have gained a better understanding of the state of our relationship, but I was so focused on my new business that I believed our bond was strong enough to weather this temporary challenge. At first, Melinda was upset with my travel schedule. I tried to help her see how these sacrifices would benefit us in the long run. I was building something important, but her concerns made me uneasy. As time went on, things began to improve a bit. While we hadn't quite returned to the solid connection we once shared, Melinda's complaints about my schedule started to lessen. As the days passed and the chaos of the wedding faded, I thought it was a good sign that things were settling down. But in hindsight, I should have been more concerned. Jean-Pierre had begun to spend more time with my kids and around our family. When he visited, he acted as if he were an old friend, knocking casually twice before letting himself in if the door was unlocked, and helping himself to snacks from the kitchen. If I didn't know him well, I might have genuinely liked him. He had a charm that made him popular at the car lot. But I was all too aware that it was just an act. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of his true self. There were moments when he could be jealous and competitive, especially when it came to the girls. I noticed Francine seemed to be affected by this, her laughter quieting in his presence. I had nearly given up trying to voice my concerns to Melinda. It often felt like I was swimming against the tide. She was less receptive to my perspective, and it seemed like we were no longer partners facing challenges together but rather opponents on opposite sides. Still, I held on to the hope that we could mend our relationship, though I knew I needed to ensure the business was thriving first. The company was on the right track, and I was optimistic that my relentless travel and long hours would pay off. I felt a responsibility to my small team, which included 4 dedicated individuals: Janice, Taylor's older sister, a single mom juggling 3 kids, Ryan, a former trainee with a wife expecting their first child, and Albert, who I knew little about aside from the fact that he had countless photos of his children at his desk. These people worked tirelessly alongside me to build our business and achieve our goals. I appreciated their sacrifices and felt a deep sense of duty towards them. As fall settled in during our first year, I finally felt like I could take a breath. Business was thriving, and our sales steadily climbed. Clients enjoyed working with us, and we had successfully added a couple of new product lines to our offerings. Riding high on this success, I decided to reach out to Melinda one Tuesday evening. I knew the kids were usually with Jean-Pierre, and I suggested we go out for dinner together. "I'm not sure," she replied, a hint of exhaustion in her voice. "It's been a long day." Not the enthusiastic response I had hoped for, but she didn't say no. "Come on, Mel," I pressed. "When's the last time we went out, just the two of us?" She paused for a moment, contemplating. "Okay," she finally said, though it felt more like a reluctant concession than a heartfelt agreement. Still, I remained hopeful that once we were together, we'd find our footing again. That Tuesday night, as I prepared for our dinner, Jean-Pierre casually walked into our house. He helped himself to a drink and settled at the kitchen table, waiting for the kids to join us. He was relaxed, chatting with me like we were old friends. Moments later, Melinda came down the stairs looking lovely, a touch of makeup enhancing her features. I couldn't help but admire her. "Wow, Melinda, you look amazing," Jean-Pierre remarked, his smile broadening. "Are you heading out?" "Yes, Kevin and I are going to grab something to eat," she replied. "Oh, you are?" he asked, his curiosity clear. I noticed his smile dim slightly as the realization sank in. Melinda avoided his gaze, a hint of discomfort washing over her. The moment felt awkward, and I sensed a tension in the air that made my stomach twist. As we settled into our dinner, I wrestled with whether or not to bring up my concerns about Jean-Pierre. Part of me wanted to understand the underlying tension, especially given the odd atmosphere earlier. But the evening was unfolding beautifully, one of the best we'd had in ages. I knew that if I said the wrong thing, I could ruin it all, so I chose to remain silent for the time being, planning to observe and see how things played out. The following week, I left for a business trip to California on Sunday, with plans to return on Wednesday. Fortunately, I wrapped up my work ahead of schedule and headed to the airport for my 3:40 p.m. flight, landing at SeaTac around 6 p.m. I arrived early and spent an hour chatting with my friend Alan, catching up on both work and personal matters. Just as we were about to board, my phone died. I realized I had packed my charger in my checked bag, but I thought it would be a nice surprise to return home tonight instead of the following day. When I finally pulled into my driveway that Tuesday night, it was dark, but the lights in my house were on. You may have heard stories about a businessman coming home early to a surprising scene. Well, in some ways, I might have preferred that. As I opened the door, I was met with a scene that sent a wave of unease through me. There was pizza on the kitchen table, music playing, and laughter emanating from Francine and Jean-Pierre. It felt like a family gathering, and suddenly I was the outsider in my own home. All eyes turned to me in surprise as I stepped inside with my suitcase. Melinda looked shocked, a hint of guilt flashing across her face. Esme just stared at me, sadness clouding her expression. Francine, however, didn't miss a beat, barely acknowledging my presence. Jean-Pierre, on the other hand, stayed calm and welcoming, acting as if he were the host. "Kevin," he said with a broad smile, "welcome. Can I get you something to drink?" He rummaged through the refrigerator as if this were his home. "We're out of beer," he added cheerfully. Melinda," I began, my voice steady but strained. "I didn't think you'd be home until Wednesday." "It's girls' night with Jean-Pierre," she explained, her tone light but failing to mask the tension beneath. It made sense, but something felt off. Jean-Pierre was acting like he belonged here, and Melinda seemed too comfortable with the whole situation. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. I finished my work early. I started to head upstairs to our bedroom, trying to shake off the strange feeling that lingered. As I put away my clothes and unpacked my suitcase, I could hear Jean-Pierre's laughter followed by Francine's joyful giggles drifting up the stairs. A few minutes later, Melinda entered the bedroom. "How was your trip?" she asked, her tone casual but lacking genuine interest in the details. I stayed quiet, contemplating the evening's unfolding events. Finally, I turned to her. "It was fine. Why don't you go back downstairs and join the girls?" As she nodded and left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing in ways I wasn't ready for. The unease settled in my gut like a stone, and I knew I needed to figure out what was really going on. It had been a long few days, and I was feeling the weight of it all. As I stood in the living room, trying to process everything, I noticed Melinda hesitating by the door. "You seem upset about something," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Yeah, I guess so," I replied, my voice louder than I intended. I took a breath, trying to soften my tone. "I come home to find my family, including you, laughing and having fun in our house, and then there's Jean-Pierre. He's let those girls down so many times, and now he's acting like he owns our fridge." I realized I was venting more than I should have, but I was exhausted, and Jean-Pierre's presence was really bothering me. "You're making a big fuss over nothing," Melinda shot back. "Jean-Pierre is trying to do better, and it's important for him to be in their lives. After all, he is their father." Her words stung, cutting deeper than I expected. I cared for those girls and always tried to be there for them. I couldn't count how many times Jean-Pierre had disappointed them, and it felt like I had been more of a father to them than he ever was. "Okay," I replied, trying to hold back the frustration. There was a silence between us, heavy with unspoken words. Melinda watched me unpack for a moment before turning to leave, not saying anything else. It felt like another thread in our already fragile relationship was fraying. Even Francine, our younger daughter, seemed to sense the growing distance. Esme, however, was different. She and I had grown closer during this tumultuous time. It was as if she could see through her father's facade, while my connection with Melinda was clearly unraveling. Looking back, I realized that two main factors had influenced everything that followed: Jean-Pierre's impact and the feelings Melinda had for him. She knew he was careless and untrustworthy, but the allure of the bad boy seemed far more appealing than the steady comfort I provided. Then there was my job. In early January, I was busy focusing on my small team, determined to ensure our business thrived. I often thought that if I had still been with Van Duen, I might have had more time for my marriage and perhaps things would have turned out differently. Instead, I felt a noticeable lack of closeness between Melinda and me. We never talked about our problems, our once strong bond faded to only a few fleeting moments of connection. Then came the phone call in January. Despite the troubles at home, our business had done well in its first year, and we were optimistic about an even better second year. My team worked diligently, and I valued all the late nights and sacrifices they made for our success. Almost half of our business came from McLean's Lumber, thanks to my friendship with Alan Church. I made sure McLean's got good deals, and in return, he kept the orders coming. But I was also aware that relying too heavily on one customer could be a double-edged sword. Any disruption could lead to significant problems. Then it happened. I was at the office when I noticed an incoming call from Alan Church. "Hey buddy, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "Man, this is really hard," he replied immediately, his voice heavy with concern. My good mood faded instantly. Something was wrong. "What's going on?" "Apparently, Van Duen has offered McLean a surprising deal for the year on tropical hardwoods." "They went straight to my boss," he explained, and my stomach dropped. "What price are they quoting you?" I asked, hoping we could match it. When he told me the figure, my heart sank. It was lower than what I could offer. "Kevin, I'm really sorry," Alan said, genuine regret in his voice. "I tried. I talked about your quality and how well you serve them, but it didn't matter. My bosses said we had to be competitive with pricing." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing as I calculated our numbers, sales, costs, and cash reserves. Losing the McLean business would be a crushing blow. I realized we might be out of business in 3 months, maybe 4. I needed to act fast. Gathering my staff wasn't difficult, there were only 3 of them. I explained the situation, telling them I was working on a plan. The truth was, I had no idea what that plan would entail. I told them that if anyone wanted to leave to find a new job, I would understand. Silence hung heavy in the air as they stared at me in shock. Finally, Albert broke the quiet, his voice shaky. "Boss, are we still getting paid this week?" I took a deep breath. Yes, everyone will be paid, I assured them, though I was filled with uncertainty about how I would manage it. But if you find other jobs, please feel free to explore them. I looked at the three of them, wondering how I would fulfill my promise to pay them. Kevin, Ryan interrupted, I'm not going anywhere. If we all work hard together, we can get through this. Yeah, I'm with you, Janice Pilkington chimed in, her resolve firm. Albert nodded in agreement. We've got your back. Okay, thank you all, I said, grateful for their loyalty. But the weight of responsibility was heavy on my shoulders. Janice was a single mom of 3, Ryan had a newborn, and I knew Albert had a family to care for, too. It was a lot to think about, and I had my own family to support as well. When I shared the news at home, the reaction was nowhere near as positive as it had been with my team. I gathered everyone around the kitchen table, knowing we needed to have an important discussion. I explained the situation about my business and how things were going to be tight for a while. What do you mean by tight? Melinda asked, her arms crossed defiantly. We'll need to keep an eye on our spending, cut back a bit, and be careful, I explained. My birthday's next month, and you promised me a phone. Francine protested. Esme got a phone when she was my age. She added, her frustration evident. We'll see, I replied, trying to defuse the situation. Francine stormed off, visibly upset, while Melinda stayed quiet, her disappointment hanging heavy in the air. Only Esme seemed to grasp the seriousness of the conversation. The family meeting fell apart, leaving me sitting in silence, wrestling with the best options for my business and family. To my surprise, Esme, who usually didn't say much, showed a gesture of support. Thanks, S, I said, appreciating her kindness. It meant more than she could know, a small light in an otherwise dark moment. As I sat there, contemplating the uncertain path ahead, I realized that I needed to find a way to pull us back together, to rebuild what had been lost and forge a stronger future for all of us. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion settle over me. I stayed up late, poring over our finances and the business's cash flow. I knew managing our finances would be a challenge. While we had products to sell, I needed liquid capital to keep everything running smoothly. An idea struck me, maybe I could take on some construction work on the side. In our neighborhood, there was always someone looking to build a fence, add new siding, or install a deck. If I could pick up weekend jobs, it might help cover our home expenses while keeping the business afloat. However, more bad news hit on Monday. Several of our customers had started switching to Van Dune products, and our sales were at risk of dropping even further. I hit the road, determined to secure a few new clients and retain some of our existing business. It wasn't enough, but it was a small victory. I fell into a routine of spending my days selling in the field and my evenings at the office, tackling all the other tasks necessary to keep the business alive. On weekends, I focused on building a fence for a neighbor just a couple of streets away, hoping the extra cash would cover our living expenses while all our business income went toward paying employees and bills. Deep down, though, I knew this wouldn't be sustainable. Over the next month, our business was down by 40% compared to what I had projected, and my savings were dwindling too quickly. I noticed Van Dune products were everywhere. Their materials might not have been as high quality as ours, but they were cheaper, and that made them a tempting option for many customers. As I worked tirelessly day and night, life at home grew increasingly difficult. I was hardly there, and when I was, I faced a barrage of questions about money, finances, and bills. I started sleeping at the office several nights a week. I had a trip to Brazil scheduled soon, one I had booked back when money was less of a worry. I was set to leave in about 30 days. Despite how much I was needed here, I still felt the pull to go to Brazil. Something felt off with Melinda, and I had a nagging suspicion it was connected to Jean-Pierre. Not long ago, even amidst the growing distance between us, Melinda and I had communicated regularly. Our talks, though not always pleasant, at least kept us informed about what was happening in each other's lives. Most of our conversations revolved around the girls, their small victories, their challenges, and the everyday discussions parents have about their kids. But now, our chats had dwindled to almost nothing. A lot of this was on me. I was so focused on keeping the business afloat that I didn't notice the cracks forming in our marriage until it was nearly too late. One topic we always seemed to agree on was Jean-Pierre. We often discussed his shortcomings as a parent and how best to support the girls emotionally. But lately, during our rare conversations, I noticed Melinda would grow quiet whenever I brought him up. One particular conversation laid everything bare. "Is Jean-Pierre getting the girls tomorrow night?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Yes," was her terse reply. "Wow," I remarked, half-jokingly. "This could be a record, 4 weeks in a row without him canceling on the girls." "Well, he's been around a lot more than you have lately," she shot back, and I felt a sharp jab of frustration. "Mel," I said, exasperated, "I'm trying to save my business. I'm doing this for you and the girls, you know that." I could feel my frustration rising as she continued, "Why don't you just get a regular job and bring home a steady paycheck?" I stared at her, surprised. I thought she understood how much my job meant to me, yet here she was suggesting that I had let the family down because of money. I was working long hours every day of the week, and I was utterly worn out, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I kept quiet, knowing that saying anything could make things worse. But her perception of my silence as weakness only added fuel to the fire. "At least Jean-Pierre has a steady job," she added, her words slicing through me. I couldn't hold back my frustration any longer. "That's hard to believe," I shot back, feeling a mix of anger and hurt. In a flash, I stood up, grabbed my things, and headed to my office, glancing back to see her looking visibly upset. In my office, I reflected on the challenges in my life, my marriage, my business. I had poured so much energy into work, believing it was what mattered most. I had hoped Melinda would understand my long hours, but maybe I had been too optimistic. It was clear, I needed to focus on my marriage, and I decided I would start that tomorrow. For now, I thought it best to take a break. I spent the rest of the evening working, but my mind drifted to Melinda and the girls. A few days later, I took some of my dwindling savings and bought flowers for Melinda, hoping to extend an olive branch. When I arrived home that evening, I was taken aback to find my mother-in-law and the girls watching TV, but Melinda was nowhere to be found. "Hi, Dad," Esme said brightly, while Francine merely waved at me, her attention glued to the screen. I smiled at Esme. It was a nice surprise to hear her calling me Dad more often. "Hello, Kevin," my mother-in-law greeted me, but I noticed she seemed a bit off, her gaze avoided mine, and her demeanor was strangely evasive. "Where's Melinda?" I asked, trying to mask my concern. "She's out with friends," my mother-in-law replied, acting uncharacteristically strange. I wondered if she was hiding something. "Do you know which friends?" I pressed for more details, but she shrugged, seemingly unsure. Something didn't feel right. "Why aren't the girls with Jean-Pierre?" I inquired, my instincts kicking in. My mother-in-law, despite being an attractive woman even at her age, didn't seem particularly sharp. Her answer to my question confirmed my fears. "They saw him before they left," she said, unwittingly revealing more than she realized. "Who left?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Jean-Pierre and Mel." She started but abruptly stopped, her face shifting as she realized she had let slip something she shouldn't have. "Wait, what do you mean, Melinda and Jean-Pierre?" I pressed, but she clammed up, clearly uncomfortable. "Now that I'm home, you can go," I said firmly. "I'll stay with the girls." She hesitated for a moment but then quickly agreed and left. With my mother-in-law gone, it turned into a lovely evening with just me and the girls. I cherished the time we spent together, trying to push aside the worries that clouded my mind about what all of this could mean for the future. Eventually, I got the girls to bed, and as I tucked them in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in my family, but in my life as a whole. I waited, feeling the tension in the air, until after 10 p.m., when I finally heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up outside. The headlights cast shadows on the living room ceiling, and then, suddenly, the car shut off. For a few moments, everything was silent. I figured Melinda and her mother had noticed my car and were deciding what to do next. When she walked through the door, Melinda looked uneasy, her brow furrowed with worry. I felt drained, having put in extra hours at my business while juggling our household finances. The weight of it all felt overwhelming, and a troubling feeling crept in that my wife might not be completely honest with me. As she stepped inside, she locked eyes with me for just a second before quickly looking away. "How was your evening?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady even though my insides were churning. "Fine," she replied curtly, her voice lacking its usual warmth. Surprised, I noted, "I saw your mother was here." "She wanted to spend time with the girls," Melinda said, avoiding my gaze like it was too painful to meet my eyes. "Isn't it Jean-Pierre's turn to be with them on Tuesday?" I asked, fully aware he had other plans. Her response hung heavy in the air. "I don't know," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm tired. I'm going upstairs." I watched her retreat up the stairs, feeling as if everything in my life was teetering on the edge of collapse. The tension between us had shifted into something heavier, more suffocating. To sum it up, my business was struggling, and I had people counting on me. I had promised to take care of them, and they trusted me. Meanwhile, my marriage, which I had hoped to mend once I got my business sorted out, felt like it was unraveling. I had no clue how deep the trouble ran, but I could sense the cracks widening. Then there were the girls. Although I never voiced it, I felt a profound responsibility for them. Jean-Pierre was their biological father, but they needed more than a man preoccupied with himself. I had always intended to support them, but now I worried about my ability to do so. These thoughts swirled around my mind like a storm as I drove to my office that night. Sleep was elusive, and I ended up working late into the night. The weeks that followed felt like I was drowning, constantly busy, rarely taking a break. Things between Melinda and me were tense, and our home felt unwelcoming. I hadn't confronted her about Jean-Pierre yet. Let me be clear, I was not accepting their relationship. But as I plotted my next steps, I worried that a confrontation might harm my bond with the girls. I knew I needed a strategy, but so far, nothing had come to me. The one piece of good news was that my business seemed to be leveling off. We were still far from my goals, but it felt like we had hit rock bottom and could finally begin to recover. As I prepared for my trip to Brazil, I hoped I could pay my workers for a few more months, maybe 3. Leaving home that morning, the weather was chilly, and Melinda didn't even say goodbye. I received a hug from Esme and a quick bye, Dad, from Francine, and that was it. As I walked to my car, Esme suddenly appeared. "Hey, easy. What's up?" I said, forcing a smile. "Dad," she started, and I liked when she called me that. "I'm scared to tell you something." "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked gently, sensing the seriousness in her voice. She paused for a moment, gathering her courage before continuing. "When you're not home, Jean-Pierre sometimes comes over, and he and Mom go upstairs together." A knot tightened in my stomach. I had suspected something was happening, but hearing it from her was like a punch to the gut. I took a deep breath and said, "Okay, thanks, trying to stay calm for her sake. "Now, sweetie, I really need to go." She hugged me tightly and wouldn't let go. "You promise you're coming back?" "I promise," I replied, my heart heavy with uncertainty. The long flight gave me ample time to reflect on my situation with Melinda. I remembered the first time I saw her in St. Thomas. She was the most popular girl there, undeniably attractive. Jean-Pierre had always had a strong influence on her, his mark was unmistakable. When I first met Melinda, I was a steady presence in her life, reliable, and there for the girls. Jean-Pierre, on the other hand, was different. He was ambitious and clever, slowly weaving himself into her life over the years, leaving a deep impression. My own struggles at work only complicated things further. When Melinda and I started dating, my stable job had been appealing to her. But as work became more challenging, I felt that I had lost that part of my charm, which only strained our marriage further. My weakness was just what Jean-Pierre needed to push his way back into her life. If it weren't for the girls, I would have stood up for myself, but I didn't want to upset their world. I felt lost, wrestling with these thoughts as I flew to Brazil. Upon reaching the tuna village, I was greeted by a vibrant atmosphere. A celebration was in full swing, filled with music and warm welcomes from my friend Mafi. The next day, we toured the hardwood plantation and discussed business. Mafi informed me that they were preparing for the harvest and a shipment would be ready soon. I hesitated to share my own problems, unsure of how to broach the subject. Later, we visited the orphanage, and I was pleased to see the positive changes there. The children were full of joy, laughing and playing despite the hardships they faced. As we sat on a log watching them, Mafi glanced at me closely. "Kevin," he said, "you look troubled." I tried to brush off his concern with a smile, assuring him everything was fine, but his worried expression remained unchanged. "Why not talk to me?" Mafi asked. "You always bring joy here." "Not today." He was right. I usually felt uplifted during my visits, but my worries felt too heavy this time. I looked away for a moment, then back at Mafi, whose concern was palpable. I knew I had to share what was really going on. As we walked through the rainforest, I began to explain my business troubles. Mafi listened intently, not just for the potential impact on the tuna but because he genuinely cared about how I was feeling. Finally, for reasons I couldn't fully articulate, I opened up about my issues with Jean-Pierre, Melinda, and the girls. Mafi listened carefully and asked a few questions, his understanding eyes encouraging me to share more. As we walked along the path in silence, Kevin suddenly broke the stillness. "Mafi," he said, "I have something for you. You must hide it." He swept his hand through the air like a plane gliding across the sky, and I couldn't help but feel a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Was he going to give me something to conceal for my trip? "What is it, Mafi?" I asked, confusion etching my face. "Bontique," he replied, using the word I had learned meant a powerful poison. He demonstrated with a gesture that mimicked a blow dart, as he had explained before. My heart raced at the thought. "Poison?" I asked in surprise. He met my gaze with a steady look, nodding solemnly. "But what will I do with the bontique?" I pressed, using his term again. We walked in silence for a bit longer, Kevin contemplating how to share the story behind the dangerous substance. In the past, when Issa from another village tried to take tuna women in shelter, we protected our village, he said, puffing out his cheeks as he mimicked the act of defending our home. "Kevin, you want me to take this with me?" I asked, disbelief creeping into my voice. "Yes," he replied, seriousness settling over him like a heavy blanket. "Take it and hide it for your journey." He handed me a small, intricately carved wooden container. The weight of it in my palm felt significant. I could sense a little liquid sloshing inside, tightly sealed. "Kevin," I said, trying to sound casual despite my growing concern. "You need to keep the bontique away from your skin. It's dangerous." He grabbed my arm firmly, his grip conveying the urgency of his warning. I paused, uncertainty washing over me. I wasn't sure I wanted this gift, and the implications of carrying such a thing felt overwhelming. But refusing it would be rude, and I didn't want to offend my friend. "Thank you for being my friend, Mafi," I said, wrapping my arms around him in a brief embrace. I tucked the small wooden container into my backpack, a mix of gratitude and dread swirling inside me. As I went through security, I suddenly realized I was carrying something I shouldn't have. Even if no one noticed, I felt a twinge of anxiety about what I had tucked away. When my plane from Brazil finally landed in Atlanta, I switched on my phone and saw a flurry of missed calls, 3 from Ryan and at work, 2 from my friend Alan Church, and calls from 2 customers in California, along with several numbers I didn't recognize. Among them were messages from Taylor Pilkington and Melinda. Melinda's text simply read, "We need to talk." A few weeks ago, I might have interpreted that as good news, but now a knot of worry tightened in my stomach. Taylor's message, terse and urgent, said, "Call me, important." I figured that could wait, at least for now. My priority was to call Ryan first. After a few rings, he answered, his voice rushing. "Kevin," he said, sounding panicked. "Where are you? I've been trying to reach you. Have you talked to anyone?" "Ryan, slow down," I replied, trying to calm him down. "I just got here. I haven't talked to anyone yet. Take a deep breath and tell me what's going on." "Okay," he said, exhaling loudly. "We've had calls all day. The cheap hardwoods Van Doon has been selling are no good." As Ryan explained that the wood was getting damaged due to the changing weather, warping while sitting in storage, I felt a mix of concern and relief wash over me. I had suspected this could happen, but now it seemed like good news for us. "We've been getting calls from all over," Ryan continued. "That must be why Alan and some others were trying to reach you." "All right," I said, feeling my mind race with possibilities. "First, we need to raise prices by 10%. I'll order more wood from Brazil and start taking orders. I'll also call Alan." Optimism surged through me. It felt good to take control of the situation. "Got it," Ryan replied, his voice steadier now. My flight was about to board, but I wanted to touch base with Alan before I left. "Hey there," he answered, his tone shifting to serious. "Are you still abroad?" "No, I'm back and getting ready to fly to Seattle," I said. "I need some of your hardwood," he declared, urgency in his voice. "And I need a lot of it." I decided to tease him a little. "I have very little left, and my next orders are almost full," I said, knowing neither of those statements was true. "Come on, Kev," he pleaded. "Wasn't I there for you when you started?" He had been, and I appreciated that support. "Alan, I'm about to board my flight. When I'm back in the office, I'll see what I can do," I replied, trying to balance my friendship with business. "That's not good enough for me," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Okay, here's what I'll do," I proposed. "You give me a yearly order and I quoted a price that was 5% higher than my usual rate, and I'll ensure you get the wood for the entire year." He paused, and I could almost hear him weighing his options. "Alan, my friend," I continued, "that is my final offer. I'll send the order to Ryan." "Thanks a lot," he said, relief evident in his tone. As I settled into my seat on the plane heading home, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. With the good news about the business, my money worries began to dissipate, and for the first time in a while, I felt a glimmer of hope. But alongside that relief, my thoughts shifted back to my marriage and the girls. I would reach out to Melinda as soon as I got home to discuss what was on her mind. After I landed, I immediately called Melinda, but I only reached her voicemail. I tried contacting a few others, but it was too late, and no one was picking up. I decided I would try again tomorrow from the office. Just then, my phone rang. I thought it would be Melinda, but it was Taylor Pilkington. I hesitated for a moment before picking up. "Kevin," she said urgently, "I need to talk to you. It's really important." "What's going on?" I asked, sensing the drama in her tone. "I need to see you in person." "It's really important," she insisted, her voice edged with urgency. "Taylor, I've been traveling all day, and I'm exhausted. Can't we just—" Right then, my phone buzzed again. It was Melinda. "Hey, Taylor, I need to call you back," I said quickly, cutting off the conversation. "You better. It's important," she shot back before I hung up. "Melinda?" I said when I answered. "Are you back? Are you?" she asked, clearly aware of my travels. "Yes, I'm just heading home now," I replied. She paused, and I could sense the weight of her words before she spoke. "It's better if you don't come home right now," she said softly, a hint of sadness in her voice. "For the girl's sake," she added, knowing those words would hit home. "Why?" I asked, although I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "It's complicated," she said. "We need to talk, just not now. Maybe this weekend. Please, do this for the girls." Frustration boiled over in me as I drove through the rain. "Fine," I finally said, my voice strained. "But we need to talk soon, okay?" I heard her reply quietly, but a few moments later, I realized she had hung up. As I drove in a fog toward my office, where I had spent too many late nights, I began organizing my tasks for Friday. I remembered Taylor's call. I might as well hear her out to clear my schedule. Whatever was brewing, I wanted to be prepared. "Meet me at the Stagecoach in 20 minutes, Taylor said when I called her back. The Stagecoach was a bar nestled in the heart of South Puget Sound, a place known for its dim lighting and cozy atmosphere. As I arrived, I noticed Taylor waiting outside. She looked a bit nervous, and that only piqued my curiosity even more. "Okay, Taylor," I said as I approached her. "What's so important that we had to meet here?" She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around as if she were afraid someone might overhear us. Taylor was still strikingly beautiful, and I found myself wondering why she had never married. "Kevin, I don't really know how to say this, but I have to," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been a good friend for a long time. You hired my sister, and she relies on that job, so I couldn't keep this to myself." My heart began to race. "Okay, so what is it?" I asked, starting to feel impatient. "This week, we had a gathering with the girls," she continued. "It was one of those nights when everyone was talking freely. Melinda mentioned Jean-Pierre. She said she and Jean-Pierre are back together." My stomach dropped. "We were all surprised because of her past," Taylor went on. "She said Jean-Pierre was the father of her children and that they were meant to be together. She even mentioned she had a plan." "A plan?" I echoed, dread creeping into my voice. "Yes," Taylor nodded. "This was her plan. She wants to leave you, take your house, and half of your business. She wants her mother to come live with the girls in your house. Then she and Jean-Pierre would move to her mom's condo by the water. They'd visit the girls each week but could live their lives however they wanted." I stared at Taylor, stunned. "You're not serious," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You bet I am," she replied, her tone firm. "I'm tired of being a mother. I want to enjoy the life I deserve." Taylor looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I had so many questions racing through my mind. What made Melinda think her mother would agree to this? What did she say when you asked her about it? I pressed. "She said after her father died, the girls became the most important thing to her mother," Taylor explained. "Besides, she claimed her mother always did what Melinda asked." I could hardly process what I was hearing. When we pressed her for more details about her plan, she grew defensive, insisting this was the life she deserved. It felt surreal, as if we had been transported back to high school. Taylor continued, "Melinda was acting like she was the queen, and Jean-Pierre was her king, treating us like we were beneath her. Eventually, it seemed Melinda realized she had shared too much. She warned us not to tell anyone." "I struggled with this all week," Taylor admitted. "But I knew how great you were and how you helped Janice get her job. I had to tell you." I sat there, shocked. I knew Melinda could be selfish, but this felt different. If she left her daughters with their grandmother, they would miss the care and support they needed. It was painfully clear to me that she wasn't considering the impact on the girls at all. This wasn't just selfish, it was wrong, and it would hurt them deeply. After a moment of silence, Taylor shared how bad she felt about the whole situation. Finally, I stood up and thanked her, pulling her into a warm hug. Under different circumstances, I might have welcomed it more, but tonight my mind was a storm of emotions. The next day was Friday, and I promised myself I would focus entirely on my business. I would deal with Melinda later. The requests for our products had increased, and complaints about the Van Dune materials were mounting. We were receiving orders that we couldn't ship for weeks, but at least the marketplace was relieved to know they would eventually get their materials from us. In the afternoon, I received a call from Jack Valentine. He asked about work, mentioning he had heard there were issues with the Van Dune lumber at Milan and other places. We talked about lumber for a little longer, and just as I was about to end the conversation, I said, "Hey Jack, it's really busy here, I should log off." "All right," he replied, "but there's something important I need to talk with you about. Let's chat in a few weeks over lunch." I agreed, and later that day I took another look at my budget plans. I was thrilled to see we were running 30% over my original budget, great news. But as I continued my work, my thoughts drifted back to Melinda. That Saturday morning, as I jogged along the trail, I had an epiphany. Thanks to Taylor, I now knew about their grand scheme. My soft spot for the girls could be leveraged, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Melinda might use that against me. I went through my options again and again as I ran, weighing each idea and its potential consequences. Finally, a plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't ideal, but it could work. The potential results were significant, yet I worried about how to protect the girls in the meantime. I doubted whether I could make it happen, but I decided I had to try. Later, I called Melinda, asking if we could meet at my house at 6 p.m. She agreed, adding, "Kevin, Jean-Pierre will be here too." I acted a bit annoyed about Jean-Pierre for the sake of our plan, but deep down, I knew it was just what I needed. That morning, I had a few errands to run. First, I needed to find a library with internet access that wasn't local. Then I needed to locate a grocery store that sold ready-made food, somewhere not too close to home. After a bit of searching, I found the library and waited half an hour for a computer. I did my research. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. I looked up a few other things to cover my tracks, figuring it would be hard to connect my activities at the library back to me. Next, I visited the grocery store, purchasing several non-perishable items: rice, coffee, a pack of craft beer, some thin rubber gloves, and a jar of cocktail sauce. I also grabbed a tray of cooked shrimp, the centerpiece being a little bowl of red cocktail sauce. Then, I headed to my office. On Saturdays, I was usually the only one there, with no security cameras to worry about. I carefully brought my grocery bags into the small kitchenette, put on my gloves, and retrieved my travel backpack. Yes, it was still there, waiting for me. I planned my next move meticulously. At exactly 6 p.m., I was back at my house. I didn't knock, though I thought about it. Instead, I brought a plain brown grocery bag with logos from a different store to disguise my activities. The store was busier than the one I had visited earlier. As I stepped through the door, I was greeted warmly by Jean-Pierre. "Kevin. Welcome. Come in." I forced a smile, thinking to myself, this is my house, but I kept my expression neutral. "Mel." Jean-Pierre called up the stairs. "Kevin is here. Please, have a seat." He gestured toward the kitchen table, and I followed him in. "What do you have in the bag?" he asked, nodding toward the brown paper bag I was carrying. I opened it to reveal a six-pack of craft beer and a large tray of shrimp, complete with a bowl of cocktail sauce wrapped in plastic. I left a couple of other items in the bag as I set it on the floor. "I thought we should keep things light for our talk," I said, trying to ease the tension in the air. "Of course, my friend," he replied, already reaching for a shrimp and dipping it into the sauce. At that moment, Melinda walked into the kitchen, looking a bit uneasy about our meeting tonight. "Mel, look what Kevin has brought for us," Jean-Pierre exclaimed, pointing to the shrimp with a grin. "It's really good." She hesitated for a moment before picking up a shrimp, dipping it in the sauce. "Thank you, Kevin," she said softly. I wanted to shift the attention away from the fact that I wasn't eating, so I picked up a beer. Jean-Pierre opened another one for himself and grinned at me. "Now it's your turn. What are your thoughts?" Melinda then gave me a simpler version of what Taylor had told me. She didn't mention her mother moving in or selling my business. Tonight, we focused on my house. "I think it's best for the girls to stay here," Melinda said, her voice steady. "As their mother, I need to be here too." Jean-Pierre continued to enjoy the shrimp, nodding along, but it was clear his focus was mostly on the food. "And what do you suggest we do about our marriage?" I asked, sensing where this was headed. "Kevin," she began, her expression softening. "You still matter to me. I'll always appreciate how you helped me and the girls when they were younger. You'll always be part of our lives." She paused, her gaze shifting to Jean-Pierre. "But Jean-Pierre is their father, and we've reconnected. I think a quiet divorce would be best. For the girls," she added, almost as an afterthought. I sat quietly, nodding as I absorbed her words and watched the scene unfold around me. "Do you like the shrimp?" I asked Melinda, attempting to lighten the mood. "Oh yes," she replied, grabbing another piece and savoring it. "You see, Kevin," Jean-Pierre interjected earnestly, "you have been important to all of us." He looked thoughtful as he reminisced. "There were times when I made mistakes in my youth," he said, shaking his head as if trying to dismiss the past. I glanced at Melinda, who was enjoying another shrimp, unaware that I hadn't eaten anything myself. Jean-Pierre continued, "Luckily, while I was having a hard time, Melinda found you." He offered me a tight smile. "You gave a home to my girls." He spread his arms wide as if welcoming everyone, his eyes scanning my house. "You, Kevin, were my stand-in, and I appreciate that." He nodded at me, and I could feel my resentment bubbling beneath the surface. "You gave them a safe place when they needed it, and now," he concluded with a big smile, "it's time for me to take charge again." Any kindness I had felt toward him evaporated. I looked at Melinda, who seemed caught up in his words. She was smart but still enthralled by his charm. The good news was that she kept eating the shrimp. "Now, Kevin, we're all adults here, and I think we can figure out the best way to move forward," Jean-Pierre said, his tone suddenly serious. "We need to think about the girls." But then, without warning, he slumped to the side, unable to finish his sentence. Jean-Pierre fell from his chair and onto the floor, shaking violently as pink foam bubbled from his mouth. His eyes rolled back in his head. "Jean-Pierre," Melinda shouted, panic in her voice. "Kevin. Look at him. Do something." I realized the situation was dire. There were important actions that needed to be taken quickly. I feigned panic, moving toward the bathroom to grab a towel before stopping myself and heading back to the kitchen for a glass of water. "Should I call for help?" I asked Melinda, stalling for time. She nodded, but her expression shifted from panic to fear. It was as if the reality of the situation was crashing down on her. "Kevin," she whispered, "help me." Her voice was shaky, and she clearly needed assistance, though not as urgently as Jean-Pierre, who had consumed far more of the shrimp. She looked paralyzed, her speech slowing as her eyes followed me, pleading for help while the toxins affected her. I took a moment, carefully slipping on some gloves I found in the grocery bag. I grabbed the small bowl of leftover cocktail sauce from the table and poured it down the sink, where the garbage disposal I had installed years ago would take care of the remnants. I made sure to pour it all away, letting the water and disposal run longer than necessary. I wanted everything cleaned up. Melinda's eyes were on me, a silent request for assistance, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. But I remembered what Taylor had told me about their plans, which solidified my resolve. I carefully opened a new jar of cocktail sauce and filled a fresh bowl with it while wearing gloves. In my haste, I accidentally got some of the new sauce on my shirt, but I ignored it. I rinsed out the empty jar, took it down to the basement, and filled it with random nails, screws, and washers, then placed it on my workbench next to other jars of similar items. After that, I went upstairs, removed the gloves, and called 911. I tried to sound urgent as I explained the emergency. 20 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. My wife. Our friend. Please help. I told the paramedics, hoping my panic sounded genuine. By the time they left, Jean-Pierre had passed away, while Melinda was still alive but in critical condition. Later, the police reached out to me with news from the hospital. The first diagnosis suggested serious shellfish poisoning. I had looked into it before and knew that certain toxins could be deadly. I also realized that this incident would change everything, my life, my family, and the very fabric of our relationships. As the reality of the situation sank in, I couldn't help but think about how some symptoms of shellfish poisoning mirrored those caused by certain poisonous frogs. When the police arrived to question me about what had transpired, I recounted the evening's events, emphasizing our conversation about the kids and the fact that Jean-Pierre was a good friend who frequently spent time at our home. After I answered their inquiries, it seemed they didn't suspect me of any wrongdoing related to Jean-Pierre's tragic fate or Melinda's condition. They meticulously examined the scene, even taking the almost empty tray of shrimp for testing. I never followed up on the results, perhaps I was just anxious about it all. Yes, Melinda was alive, though completely paralyzed, which was a small mercy in the wake of such tragedy. The doctor informed me he had never encountered a case like hers before. Typically, shellfish poisoning resulted in only mild symptoms, making her condition exceptionally rare. With genuine sadness in my heart, I sat the girls down to explain the heartbreaking loss of Jean-Pierre and how it had profoundly impacted their mother. We all shared tears, feeling the weight of the moment. Then, Esme asked the question I had been dreading, "What's going to happen to us?" Worry glimmered in her eyes. "Well," I began, trying to choose my words carefully, "you could probably stay with your grandma." I could feel their hesitance, Francine's face scrunched up in concern, while Esme shook her head vehemently. "Melinda's mom is a nice person, and she could take care of you for a little while," I offered, but deep down, I knew she couldn't provide the support they would need as they grew up. Even at their young age, they understood this instinctively. "Or," I continued, "we could all stay here together." Their eyes lit up, and they nodded in agreement, clinging to the idea of staying together. Years ago, before Melinda and I married, we had made a significant decision to purchase long-term care insurance. We had made that choice following the experience of Melinda's father's illness and the toll it took on her mother. We had secured a solid policy and made sure to pay the premium every month without fail. Who could have imagined that we would find ourselves in this situation, finally understanding the value of that policy? Every Sunday, the girls and I visited Ellenhurst, a care home located about 15 miles away in Bridger. We brought flowers to brighten Melinda's room, and I watched her face as the girls shared stories about school, their friends, favorite shows, and their daily lives. There was a fleeting warmth in her smile as she listened to them, but when her gaze shifted to me, it felt different. Even though she didn't move, I sensed a depth of emotion in her eyes that the girls didn't seem to notice. I took a moment to speak with the doctor at Ellenhurst about her health. "It's unlikely she'll recover," he told me gently. "If she had received help earlier, things might have been different." By the time she reached the hospital, her nervous system had been severely affected. Her brain and eyesight are fine, she can hear and understand everything. But her nervous system is weak, so she can't move or speak. "The good news is she seems healthy otherwise and should have many years ahead of her," he added. "Did you hear that?" I asked Melinda after the doctor left. "He said you're doing well." I smiled, hoping to lift her spirits, and to my surprise, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes when she looked at me. Months passed, and finally, I found myself on a much-anticipated vacation. As the plane took off, heading southwest, I felt a rush of excitement. We had talked for months, but it had been ages since I had seen her. I remembered the connection we shared back in high school, especially that unforgettable dance. This reunion felt special. We had discussed our plans thoroughly, and I was eager to surprise her, hoping she would enjoy it as much as I thought I would. Melinda's mom had kindly taken care of the girls for the week. So much had changed in our lives, yet some things felt familiar. The girls and I were now living in my home. They missed their mother dearly, but they seemed to be adjusting surprisingly well. Jean-Pierre was rarely mentioned anymore, and my friendship with Mafi remained a constant in my life. He never inquired about the boutique, and I never brought it up. I recalled my last visit to Mafi. "Kevin," he said, enveloping me in a warm hug. "I see you're happy now." I nodded in agreement, nothing more needed to be said. My work had evolved over the past year, too. Jack Valentine and I had decided to merge our businesses, a plan he had discussed with me months before. Jack took on the role of CEO, while I became president. Together, we had 22 employees, and business was thriving. Sometimes, I missed the simpler days when it was just the four of us, Ryan, Janice, Albert, and me, but I often appreciated the stability of our larger company. With Jack in charge, I could finally take this much-needed week-long vacation in Maui. She was coming from Japan, where she had been working. Our conversations over the last few months had all been online, which seemed to be the way people connected these days. Finally, we would be together in person. When my flight landed, I had about an hour to kill before hers arrived, so I picked up the rental car and prepared for the reunion. Seeing her and hugging her after all those messages felt surreal. She looked even better in person. "Oh man, what a flight," she exclaimed, releasing a deep breath. "Our hotel check-in isn't until 4 o'clock, I replied, eager to make the most of our time. "Just take me to the beach. I need to feel the ocean," she said, a playful glint in her eyes. "Sounds good." I smiled, feeling the excitement bubbling inside me. We parked the car and changed into our beach clothes. She radiated vitality, even more so than I remembered from high school. As I caught myself staring, she noticed and flashed a bright smile back at me. "This way," I said, leading her across the warm sand. We climbed over some rocks and discovered a beautiful cove on the other side. I wondered how long it would take her to notice how stunning the beach was. We were about halfway down the shore when she suddenly gasped, her eyes wide with surprise. "A beach like this?" she exclaimed, stopping to look at me. We continued walking until we found a perfect spot to lay our towels. "Nicole," I said, realizing the familiar name. "You don't have to take anything off." "Yes, it's Taylor's cousin, Nicole Arnis, my date to senior prom," she replied, laughing as she remembered. She glanced at me with a cheeky smile and said, "When in Rome." With a fun spirit, embracing the moment. "Besides, I remember how you looked at me on our first date in high school. It's about time you got to see me like this. What do you think?" I grinned. "I should probably get you some sunscreen," I replied, playfully raising an eyebrow. As the sun warmed our skin and the sound of the waves filled the air, I felt a sense of hope and connection blooming between us once more. If you enjoyed this story and want to keep up with all our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we have in store for you next. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in our next amazing tale.